Christian parenting.
Welcome back, friends, to the Called to Love podcast, where each week we discuss the practical, the clinical, and most importantly, the biblical aspects of the adoption and foster care callings. Today, I am kicking off a new series for the month of February called Trusting God with What We Cannot Control. Now, there are so many aspects of these callings that are completely out of our control. For adoption, we have no idea when we place that deposit whether a child is actually going to result from that. We have no control for international whether or not a country is going to be willing to work with us. We have no control over the timing of when that child might possibly be able to come home. So many unknowns with the paperwork, passports, even things within our own domestic side of things. There's so much unknown, and whether or not a biological parent might actually change their mind. On the foster care side of things, we don't know what it's going to look like, whether a child will be adoptable, whether they are going to successfully reunify with their biological families, whether those biological families will work those reunification plans. And there's so much hanging in the balance of what a child's future is going to look like. So, for some families, this is enough reason to shy away from God's prompting to step out in obedience. For others, it's a reason to quit once that yes has been given because it's just too overwhelming and heartbreaking. And listen, no judgment on either of these. It is a very tough reality about this calling, and I have been on both sides of that struggle. But through that struggle, I have learned something about myself that has really helped me to understand why it has been such a struggle and frustration. And that's the whole inspiration behind this series is ultimately control makes me feel safe. I like to be in control. I like to know the plan. I like to have the answers. I like for those bullet points to be right there laid out for me. And I like for those calendar dates to be set out. I love this idea of being in control. And if we're honest, I believe that our fleshly bodies gravitate towards what makes us feel safe. It is an instinct that is hardwired in our brains, and our behavior stems from that unless we are in submission to God's refining work in our lives. And we know that control is an illusion. Therein lies the need for submission and a growing trust in the Lord. So, for my story personally, God has used the adoption calling not only to learn how to love a child and parent a child in an entirely new way, but also to learn to die to my flesh in an entirely new way and see things about myself that truly needed to be refined by the Lord, that I needed to welcome Him in to do that. And this all has taken me down a path that I would have never experienced without that adoption calling and that continual death to self. Because listen, I have to revisit every day that dying to self when it comes to control. So, our family learned very early on that when it comes to the adoption calling, control is an absolute illusion. And we have learned the hard way how to rest in God's sovereignty over who was and was not supposed to be a part of our home. So, my prayer for you, and for me, honestly, as I just share a little bit of my story and my own insights, is that as we dive into this series for the month, that you too will learn more about yourself, your calling, whether it be foster care, adoption, or a combination of the two, but ultimately growing in your trust with the Lord in the things that we cannot control in this calling. So, today's topic, as we are kicking off, is failed adoption. And for many of you who have been listening for a while, I've shared our story before, but just to recap and share for maybe some of our newer listeners, our very first process began in December of 2013, where 2 days after Christmas, a baby girl who had just been born was placed in our arms and 20 minutes later was taken from our arms at the hospital. And from that moment on, our lives were forever changed. Now, you can listen to the full story in one of my earliest episodes on Called to Love, which I will link in today's show notes. But suffice it to say, from there on out, our lives were never the same, and we became experts in failed adoption. So when we began in 2013, from then until now, here we are in 2025. So 12 years later, we have experienced 10 different processes that have failed and only one successful placement with our daughter who came to us as a newborn in 2015. So we have experience in domestic, private adoption, international, state level DHS adoptions, foster to adopt. We've done it all. We've experienced all of those processes. And I just want to be very honest with you. I did not deal with it well. I did not deal with it maturely. I felt all of the feels and threw all of the tantrums that you can possibly imagine. And I'm just grateful to the Lord that He can handle all of our big feelings. But it was very, very frustrating to me because when I first started out, my focus was, you called me to do this. So where's the baby? Where's the kid? Come on, Lord, let's do this. And that is not the way the Lord works. And that's actually not the point, which is something that we're going to dive into a little bit in today's episode. But for years, I wrestled with questions, towards the Lord, like, why did you call us to this if you weren't going to fulfill it? Why is this so hard when we are clearly obeying you, when we are opening our hearts, when we're allowing this vulnerability in our lives and our finances? Why are children allowed to go back into abusive homes and situations when there are good Christian families who are ready to love and embrace and welcome them into their lives? And why is it so hard to adopt when there are so many children in need of a safe and loving home? Maybe you are asking these questions right now or have at some point, and maybe you have even more that you can add to that list. And those questions are really, really challenging. But I want to challenge you as we're talking through, and as I just kind of share some of the lessons that the Lord has taught me in the last 12 years. Maybe you'll be encouraged to shift a little bit of perspective. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. There's a picture framed in my living room where our newly adopted daughter, again, our only successful adoption, was about 3 months old. And in the moment that picture was taken, we were in Gulf Shores, Alabama, on our first beach vacation as a family. And so we had young kiddos, our boys, our biological sons were 8 and 4. And then we had a 3-month-old baby girl. And we placed a camera over our feet and we stood around in a circle and we just took a picture of our feet in the sand with that new sweet little baby's foot included in that picture. And it has been a distraction to me for years because that circle wasn't complete. Even if you look at it now, and I'll try to post a picture in the show notes so you can see what I'm talking about, it looks like there's a missing place. It looks like there was room for another foot, another member of our family. And I have held on to that for years because deep in my spirit, it felt like somebody was missing. And I put away the thought at the time because our family, quite honestly, was in deep crisis mode. As earlier that year, we had said yes to a church plant. My husband was a deacon in that endeavor. I was homeschooling our 2 biological sons and also learning firsthand the realities of adoption trauma from a newborn that screamed day and night, and sometimes so hard that she would lose her voice from the intensity of her screams and still scream silently. So there was a lot of stress in our life. There was a lot going on. And so even though I felt that deep in my spirit, I just kind of tabled it and I tucked it away. When our daughter was about 18 months old, I was taking her for a walk and I felt a very distinct prompting from the Lord to begin another adoption process. And y'all, I fought him hard. I had all of the good arguments lined up. My parents always thought I was going to be an attorney because I was really good at arguing. But nonetheless, I had all of those reasons why, Lord, I don't want to do this again. I don't want to go through this again. And the Lord just continually prompted me over and over again. So that began a journey of processes for us in the African countries of Ghana and eventually Malawi. Both of those closed out. We then transferred to a China program that closed out several months later when we got close to traveling and dossier phase. Then we came back to our own area here in our home state and opened our home to foster to adopt waiting kids in our state. And we inquired after probably a dozen children or more. And that fell through where DHS contacted us and said, hey, you've got too many kids in your home, even though we have like 3 and we were licensed to receive up to 4 more in our home. They were like, we're not going to prioritize you for adoption, so you might as well just close your home. I didn't know any better back in the day. And so we were like, okay, so we closed our home. And then we looked into other processes in South America. Our last international process was in the winter of 2019, going into the winter of 2020. And we all know what happened then. And when the world was shut down by COVID, so was our adoption process. And so there was just one thing after another. We came back to our own area, tried to look into adoption through our home state again, and just one failure after another. And as hard as that was, I wouldn't trade it for anything for where the Lord has me in perspective now. And so I just want to share a few things with you as a called to love family, honestly. And again, I'm speaking from my own experience. And so I would love to hear your response in all of this as well. But here's a few things that I have learned after experiencing failed adoption. Number one, failed adoption is not the cruelty of God and it's not punishment on you as a family. I truly believe at times that failed adoption is God's sovereign hand of protection. I believe that it is a blessing at times because He is all knowing and is aware of the inner workings of not only every person, but every detail of our lives, every step that we take. And it is God who places our feet on the path that He wants us to be in. And sometimes, even when we have a goal and a heart and a passion to do something that is extremely good and right in the Lord's eyes, it may not necessarily be good and right for us as a family, as individuals. And so it's not His cruelty and it's not His punishment. I truly believe that it is a blessing and a display of His sovereignty. Hey parents, are you looking for simple, meaningful ways to help your kids know, love, and follow Jesus? The Christian Parenting Store has exactly what you need. From scripture affirmation cards and devotionals for kids to prayer journals and customizable prayer cards, every resource is designed with your family in mind. These tools make it easier to weave faith into everyday life and give your kids a strong foundation in Christ. Don't miss the simplified guides, digital guides that have all the resources you need to learn about the topics that you care about most, from discipleship, identity, technology, and politics, all from the best voices in Christian parenting. And if you're looking to help your kids strengthen their own relationship with the Lord and start building good faith habits, check out the Kids Devotionals. There are 3 different options that your kids will love. And here's the best part. Every purchase helps Christian Parenting continue creating incredible resources for families just like yours. Make sure you head over to cpgive.org to check out all of the wonderful resources available. And again, get your family faith resources at cpgive.org. Now let's get back to the episode. Number 2, failed adoption doesn't mean that God is not in control. He loves and knows His children far more than we can fathom, and He is intimately working even in the most finite details of every single life on this earth. That is how big our God is. And so when things fall through, it does not mean that He's not in control. It's quite the opposite. It is a reminder that try as we may, again, to do something that is so good, God is in control and is ultimately the one responsible for placing children in homes and in families. He has their future in mind. He has our future in mind, and He is entirely in control. Number 3, failed adoption doesn't mean that you missed your calling. God has so much to teach us, and the success comes when we are just obedient to take a step. Our obedience is what He is looking for, a heart posture of, Lord, I will do this come what may. That is a success. That obedience is such a tremendous blessing as we walk in His good plan for us. And it doesn't mean that, Lord, we tried this. Where did we go wrong? Did we hear you wrong? Did we fail? Did we do something wrong? No, you didn't miss your calling. If you were obedient, you have fulfilled that calling, and the result is in God's hands. The other lesson I have learned is that offering your heart and your home to a child is never a waste. Even if it's a child that you have chosen to love that you haven't even met yet. I think about whether it's international adoption or domestic, foster care, any of it. By saying yes to that calling, you are offering your heart to someone that you don't even know. And how beautiful a picture of the gospel is that Jesus offered His very life for us before we knew Him. And it is a beautiful picture of that sacrificial love and the way that our hearts are molded and grown and expanded through that process is never a waste. I hope that's an encouragement to some of you today. Along those lines, here's a few things that God has done in me personally after experiencing failed adoption. First and foremost, it's deeper prayer. I can't think of many other things in my life where I have sought God harder in prayer than through all of our adoption processes, just crying out to Him with my frustrations, with my questions, and then just seeking Him and sitting in that space of prayer, which is exactly where the Lord wants us. Regardless of what we're talking about with Him, He wants that fellowship that comes through prayer. So deeper prayer has been a tremendous thing that has grown in me over the years, and I still have a long way to go. A greater dependence on Him is the next thing. I have had to lean into Him more because of all of these failed adoptions and so many details that I just don't understand, and have to be okay with surrendering that I don't understand it and that I'm not in control, and that I just have to lean into Him and let Him catch me and carry me at times when my heart is weary and when my brain is tired from all of the processes and the paperwork and the hoops that you have to jump through to even make it possible to welcome a child into your home. A greater dependence on Him is actually a blessing. And I mentioned this earlier, refining of my flesh. I think I've shared this with you on the show before. Nothing has refined me in my life greater than the adoption calling. It has brought out ugly and sin nature in me that I never knew needed to be refined. And that has been a blessing, that has been refined in me and continues to be refined in me. And that ugly sinful nature is being called out and dealt with and ideally repented of, and allowing the Lord to come in and bring light where there is darkness in my flesh and in my heart. And then lastly, what the Lord has done as a result of this experience is a call to ministry that I would have never even remotely considered had I not walked this path. To walk all of the failed adoptions and all of the processes and to have become knowledgeable in the paperwork and the logistics and all of that, I would have never known. Even though a child did not result, there was so much that I learned through all of that the Lord has now graciously allowed me to be able to utilize and share with others that are actively pursuing this calling. And it's been a tremendous blessing. At the end of the day, God's calling towards foster care and adoption are first and foremost an invitation to dependence and intimacy with Him, not just a result of a child added to your family. It will be much easier to trust Him, and it has become easier to trust Him in the things that I cannot control when my perspective and my focus has been able to shift away from a result to a relationship with God. That is ultimately whatever it is we're pursuing in our lives. It should be about relationship over result. And I hope that encourages you today as well, because I know there are some of you that are sitting in this point of frustration of, why isn't God answering my prayer? Why isn't God bringing this to fulfillment? Why? Perhaps could it be because the focus is so much on that result that you felt called and led to, but the Lord is really calling you to relationship. And in that relationship will come peace and trust and strength. God always has a lesson and growth for you, even when things don't turn out the way that you have expected. And that's a tough one to sit in. And listen, I don't expect you to have an aha moment just in a moment and to be able to release all of this, but I hope that maybe by me sharing this and this being a huge part of my journey and taking me a number of years to get to this place, that it will help you take a step forward in that direction and really allow you to sit with the Lord and hear from Him. Lord, where do you want me right now? What does that look like to wait upon you, to rest in you, and to grow in trust with you? Because the alternative is we become angry and bitter and resentful. And I want to caution us against that. And I have sat in that, friends, I have sat in that anger and frustration towards God when the result was not what I expected. But we have no way of knowing what He is protecting both you and the potential children from. God knows where each child should be placed because He already knows each of our days from beginning to end. And His main goal is not the fulfillment of our wishes, but the ultimate fulfillment of His plan. So as we close out our episode today, I know I've given you a lot to ponder, but I want to give you some questions to ask yourself when you experience failed adoption, or maybe as you are wrestling through a current failed adoption. And the first question is this: am I closer to God because of this? Am I closer to Him or am I further away? Number 2, have I grown in biblical wisdom and knowledge because of this? Ultimately, our goal is relationship with Him through the reading of His Word and through ongoing relationship and communion and prayer with the Lord. That's where we gain our wisdom and our knowledge according to the Psalms. Do I have new insight and opportunities I would not have had I not said yes to this path? Consider what you've been able to experience. Consider what you've been able to learn. Consider who you may have been able to support and to serve as a result of walking this path, even if it meant a result that you were not expecting. And lastly, has my understanding of the fulfillment of God's ultimate plan changed? Have you experienced that shift in perspective of relationship over result, of better understanding how big our God is and His sovereignty over every single life, and ultimately His goal for you, which is to walk in relationship with Him and a life that's been changed by the gospel of Christ? So, how does this land with you, friends? If you've experienced failed adoption, what has God taught you? I would love to hear from you. As always, there is a link in the show notes today for you to reach out to me and ask any follow-up questions that you might have as a result of this conversation today, or share your thoughts. Maybe share your own story. I would love to hear from you. Called to Love has truly become a community, and I have been so blessed by so many of you that I've been privileged to be able to email back and forth and message back and forth on Instagram, and some of us have even been able to have phone calls, which has been amazing. And I love being able to do that with you and learn from you. It is so wonderful to know that we are not alone in this journey. On the next episode in our series, I'm actually going to be responding to a listener question that inspired this entire series of trusting God with what we cannot control. And I want y'all to get ready because it's a tough topic. The topic is trusting God with what we cannot control related to sexual abuse. The types of abuses and traumas that our kids have experienced before they came to us, and if they have to go back into those situations. Man, that's a tough one. So I hope you'll join me next week. And until then, I love you, friends. Go live out your own call to love. Thank you so much for listening to Called to Love today. I love to hear from listeners, and so I would love to connect with you to hear your stories and answer your questions right here on the show. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, send me a direct message, or send me an email at the link in today's show notes. I pray you have been encouraged by today's episode to walk in faith and continue to embrace your own call to love. Until next time, blessings, sweet friends.